For my book vlog book, I chose Tweak Growing Up on Methamphetamines by Nick Sheff. The author chose to write this book because it's an entirely true memoir on his life growing up on alcohol, different substances, and why his life experiences led him to this point. The beginning part of the book really focuses on how his addiction to different substances started around the very young age of 11. Without giving too much away, let's just say he started with alcohol. And then once that stopped doing the job, he began to experiment with different drugs such as marijuana, ecstasy, and cocaine. Eventually, these drugs stopped doing what Nick wanted them to do, so he transitioned to his drug of choice in his early 20s. And this was crystal meth, hence the name Growing Up on Methamphetamine. A big part of Nick's story was about a lot of the different relationships he got himself into because of his drug use. There were two specific people who I won't mention for the sake of keeping the story interesting, who he found himself in a relationship with. One was a slightly older woman that actually pushed him to continue using his drugs, and one was an ex-lover who he had had relationships with during drug use, before drug use, all of that jazz. Throughout the story, you see their relationship sort of fizzle, and something happens with his lover that actually pushes him to become clean. After many different programs, 12-step programs, different drug and narcotic anonymous groups, Nick finally got clean. I chose to use Tweak as my substance abuse book because it directly relates to my APA paper on the neurotransmitter dopamine. Dopamine is your pleasure molecule, so to speak. So usually people can get dopamine from exercising or different fun activities that they enjoy. Drug addicts, however, realize that they can get an excess amount of dopamine from using their drugs. However, after a while, their dopamine receptors basically become numb to dopamine, so your brain thinks you need so much more than you actually do. And this is one of the main reasons that both Nick and Caroline kept on using their poison of choice, because they needed those happy molecules so that their brain would think they were getting the required dopamine. Speaking of Caroline, in contrast, I also read the book Drinking a Love Story by Caroline Knapp. I don't have the book with me because I used an online version. But her whole story was really about how drinking destroyed the relationships in her life with her family, with significant others, and how she just kept drinking because it felt the same way that falling in love would feel. It's like once you're in it, you can't stop. And the way that Tweak and Drinking a Love Story really relate is the fact that they both lost so much and yet couldn't stop until they lost enough to the point where there was no other choice. Both Caroline and Nick fought to get sober, and by the end, they both had. So yeah, that's my book vlog. So read Tweak. It's a really, really good book, and it really shows you the reality of drug addiction. I mean, think back to when we were 11. Would you have ever thought you would be an alcoholic? I mean, we're sitting here in class. I'm sure at least one of you is staring at me because my head is down. Would you have ever thought that, like, you could have been addicted to alcohol, addicted to crack cocaine, addicted to anything that Nick and Caroline had eventually tried by the time they were our age? I mean, yeah. Read my book. Thanks. Did I mention it's a movie? It's a movie. It's called Beautiful Boy, and it has Steve Carell in it, so all you Office fans, you can watch that. And it also has Timothy Chalamet. Read my book.